All right, here we are to talk about the sanitation options of nutrient solutions. And here they are. So we're going to talk about heat, mechanical filtration, chemical treatment, radiation, and biological control. So to start with heat treatment for sanitation. Heat treatment is rather straightforward. You take whatever it is that you're trying to sanitize, a portion of or all of your nutrient solution, you put it into this container, you apply heat. Now, according to many researchers, the kind of heat that you need for most applications for general hydroponic production is to maintain 95 degrees centigrade for 30 seconds. So we have some original research by Runia et al. In 1988, refined by McPherson et al. In 1995. And again, we're just coming to different things get inactivated at different points, but the suggestion for best practices for treating and addressing most all your pathogens, 95 degrees centigrade, 30 seconds. This hasn't really changed since this time. Instead, the tech to accomplish it has changed instead. Generally, what we've seen is that this heat, of course, requires electricity or some kind of energy to create. And as we apply more energy, it takes less time to reach this 95 degrees centigrade and then, of course, to hold it there for those 30 seconds. Perhaps the newest and most important evolution of this technology are little adjusters, controls, solenoids that allow you to take from this flash heating, this flash sanitation, and to drop it in here with minimal heat change, so that we're actually trickle feeding this 95 degrees. This is, starts at 95 degrees Celsius, trickling into your growing solution, which is probably more around 20 degrees Celsius. And so controlling this rate allows this to see minimal degree change, like up to or at or below 1 degree Celsius change as we're bringing in this hot water solution. Otherwise, if you just dump this in, you can have a greater change, but again, you'll get the right tech. Trickling in your clean solution is the way to go. The other thing that can happen is while you are adding this heat, we can have carbonates form, and carbonates precipitate from the solution and get stuck to this surface. So this is the composition of carbonate, whatever else it might be stuck to or not. With this heat, it's beginning to fall, precipitate out of solution, and crystallize, usually on the bottom of the container, but really wherever you're applying this heat. If you've got a heating rod inserted like this, then you're going to get precipitates encrusting the heating rod. The other big advancement in the tech, so beyond this trickle feed that keeps the solution from spiking its temperature, is to potentially give this an acid pre-treatment. By making this solution a little bit more acidic, we increase the solubility of the carbonate and hopefully keep it from precipitating onto this heating device. Also, sometimes instead, you can wait until this solution gets drained out, and then you can acid wash the heating device and or manually scrub to attempt to remove this carbonate precipitate. So clean up your heater so that it works better. Now, if we move on to filtration, filtration is just the act of sorting and choosing what materials are passing through and what is not. And so if we have contaminated or dirty water here, then we are filtering and sorting to get some of that gunk to go away and to instead get water to come through, just clean water. Now, this filtration can vary whether it's going actively or passively. One of the most common forms of active filtration is actually reverse osmosis. It is active because we are pressurizing the water to push it through a membrane so that all the gunk goes to the side and just water comes through. The way this is accomplished is that we just have really, really small pores. So reverse osmosis typically has pores about the size. Reverse osmosis typically have pores about the size of 10th, 100th, 1000th of a 10,000th of a millimeter of a micrometer. So really, really small. Very, very, very small part of a micron. Water is still able to slip through this. However, other things are not. So for example, we have various viruses. Viri are from 0.03 to 0.3 microns. Once we get up to most bacteria, single-celled bacteria, they're about a micron each. And then getting down to various funguses, fungi, ranging from 3 to 50 microns, and that's everything from spores to actual, single-celled or multi-celled funguses, even just their hyphae here, about 3 to 50 microns. So we can see again, this reverse osmosis at 10,000th of a micron is not allowing all these things. Like we're pushing water through this filter, and the holes are so small. The only thing that gets to slip through is actual water and some other minerals. On the passive side, we can get something like a sand column. A sand column or sand filter just uses typically sand, sometimes some other stuff, and it's passive, so we're still using pressure, but rather than actively pressurizing, we're simply using gravity to apply that pressure, which means we need from at least 80 centimeters, if not all the way up to 150 centimeters of water, 80 to 50 centimeter head of water to be cleaned to create the pressure, the downward force to get this water to slowly find its way through all this sand and come out. So again, this is passive. It doesn't take much energy. It's very effective at removing all kinds of particulate load. You just need to clean this kind of the scum layer here, what builds up and gets stuck on top of the sand. But for the most part, this is pretty great. However, it is a very poor screen for both viri and nematodes. Despite the fact that this is a passive design, it has a fairly high throughput of about 100 to 300 liters per meters squared per hour. So we can put about 100 to 300, so 200 liters per square meter of sand filter. Pretty respectable filtration, but again, if you've got viri or nematodes, it's not going to be enough. This sand filter can be refined, especially to address the viri and nematodes. We can start adding pre-treatment filters so that the water has to go through here first before it then comes back up to go through here. Or we can add, just the same, we can add a post filter. All these are going to increase the effectiveness of your filter, but of course are increasing the cost and complication and need for maintenance for the sand filter. The whole point of a sand filter is this passive filtration, the ability to get a pretty good throughput of water through a low-tech filter. Once we start adding on all these different things, we start pushing into the bounds of maybe one of these other options is worth the hassle at this point. So let me take a quick break to erase some of this stuff, get some room, and we'll finish off. Let me see, we did these two. We'll finish off. I got chemical, bio, and radiation left. All right, when it comes to chemical treatments, we have some overlap with more traditional methods of growing. Pesticides for hydroponic use are still in a novel area of research. Efforts are still being done to determine the correct application rates and how to minimize non-target effects. There are options, but definitely make sure you are getting things that are explicitly labeled for hydroponic production. Otherwise, there's no direct transfer. It's similar in that traditional agriculture sprays pesticides and hydroponics can spray pesticides. But beyond that, the similarities stop, and you start needing to follow the new rules on those labels, typically mostly around lower dosages, but just in general, make sure that you're finding something for explicit hydroponic use and that you're following that label. We can add surfactants. So surfactants are basically soaps. Their chemical makeup is such that it leads to ionic dissolution of lipid membranes. So the cell walls are dissolved by soaps. And that's that. It's why soap works when you're cleaning your dishes, and it's why surfactants can work in sanitizing your nutrient solution. They can be really convenient in that since they are basically like a soap, you can tell they're in your system if it's causing bubbles, and generally when those bubbles subside or go away, it means that it's probably time to add a little bit more surfactants. These soaps, surfactants, chemical control is particularly effective against motile spores, as found by Arad et al. In 2001. Motile spores, they're moving around, they're free-floating spores, so mostly fungi, some other pathogen, and not all of them, but again, like if the pathogen you are combating spreads via free-moving spores, then surfactants are your best control, or not best control, but an extremely effective, cheap and easy control for that kind of pathogen. Oxidation, similar to surfactants in that it's destroying these organisms, except this time it's via electron stripping. Whereas the surfactants are giving this ionic dissolution of the organic membranes, the oxidation is just purely electron stripping. Like electrons are being pulled off of the molecules, off of the whatever else is in there, whatever else is in your nutrient solution, and it just destabilizes and destroys pathogens in a pretty similar manner. A little bit more rough, a little bit more caustic, a little less safe for you and I. You know, we want to wear better safety materials, personal protective equipment when dealing with oxidation. So as mentioned, this is harming or stripping electrons from organic compounds. We really want to isolate and protect plant roots, or else this oxidation is going to damage, destroy, really harm these plant roots. However, there is one option, oxidation, if we use ozone, or basically 3 oxygens. If we use ozone, this can actually be a bit of a benefit, a help to plant roots. The performance of ozone does vary upon your system and what you're trying to combat. However, it typically performs best at about a 4 pH, and it needs about 20 to 75 minutes of exposure time. The last thing to note is that oxidation, ozone affects chelates. So depending on what chelators you're using when you're applying them, this can really affect your nutrient availability. This is usually why sanitation of a nutrient solution happens before nutrient addition. So maybe after the nutrients have all gone through the plants for a while, we sanitize the solution, then bring it back up to the proper nutrient level for plant growth. Other great oxidators are hydrogen peroxide and chlorine. Both are very effective at pathogenic control. However, again, we need to isolate all these oxidators from plant roots because hydrogen peroxide and chlorine have to be at such high concentrations to be effective controls that they become phytoxic to the plants. And so again, we're just keeping this isolation, oxidation, very caustic, both to you and I and the plants. So we're just trying to keep it separated there. All right, radiation treatment. I'm excited about this one. I like it. It's much more tame than it sounds. Radiation, we're not irradiating it like you might think at a nuclear power plant. However, radiation is radiation. We are using ultraviolet light or UV light. This is light beyond the blue from about 200 to 280 nanometers. The most effective wavelength is actually a very precise 253.7 nanometers. And that's according to, so back in 1989, Gels-Hauser et al. Found that 253.7 nanometers was perhaps the most effective, and still to this day has not been supplanted or superseded, the most effective wavelength for sanitation, for pathogen control. Now, we're not just shining a light at the water. We're not turning on a black light above the water. What's actually happening is that we have a tube or an assortment of tubes with lights embedded inside them, waterproof wiring going from the outside of the tube to the inside. But this light is suspended in the middle of the tube so that water can come in. It passes by the tube, comes very close. This minimal distance here is key to having this light be able to penetrate through all the water strong enough to sanitize things. But all this water passes through, collects back together, and emerges sanitized, with that radiation treatment having killed and obliterated any organic compounds and rendered them inert. These modern devices that you can buy typically only require about 18 watts, not bad at all, to clean about 750 gallons per hour. So that's all you'll need for a small system, is one of these tubes powering 18 watts to keep it on as you're running 750 gallons per hour through it and just sanitizing all the water as soon as it comes out the other side. They are greater than 99% effective, also called inactivation. So again, this isn't filtering. We're not pulling particulates, contaminants, pathogens out of the water. We're inactivating them. We are destroying them. We are rendering them dead. And so they're still in the water, but they are inactivated. The water is now sanitized. It's not necessarily clean, it's not clear or pure, but it is sanitized. Nothing that comes through here is going to activate on the other side and cause pathogenic problems on your plants. Ultimately, your wiggle room when you buy one of these devices kind of comes down to how strong you want to clean, how much energy you want to put in, and how clean you want your water to be. Generally, if we put out about 100 microjoules per square centimeter, that is a good fungicide. We have to go step it up to 250 microjoules per square centimeter for complete inactivation, including viri. So we had reverse osmosis, an active form of filtration that could remove viruses, heat treatment that can render viruses incomplete. This radiation treatment, if we step it up high enough, can also obliterate viruses and render your water safe. Something to be wary of with this water though, this UV, it can create ozone, or O3, and it can create free radicals. Both of these are bad for crop performance, as has been shown by a number of studies. Further, UV can also destroy chelators, just like we found in the heat treatment. EDDHA is a chelator that is the most UV stable, however, it's also the most expensive. So again, this is just, we're seeing how there's choices to be made. Like, you obviously want to filter your water. You need to add nutrients to your water. But in what order do you do them, and how does one affect the other? Like, we want as little nutrition coming into the filtration as possible, because our filtration, our sanitation, whether it be filtration or some other treatment, is going to affect those nutrients. So, biocontrol, using other living agents to minimize, reduce, combat the living agents we don't want, our pathogens. What do you think? Biocontrol is most effective as what kind of treatment? Preventative. Biocontrol is most effective as a preventative treatment. Studies are still ongoing for actually saving a system, cleaning a system up. But in general, what we are doing is we're managing two different resources when we're coming to pathogen control. Anywhere that we're growing, we've got habitat and we've got nutrients, and both of those could grow something we want, something desirable, or it could grow something undesirable, a pathogen. By seeding these biocontrols preventatively, preemptively, trying to colonize these places with either neutral or beneficial bacteria, microorganisms in general. We're trying to, just like keeping weeds down on a lawn, you don't want to just plow over an area and leave bare ground. Weeds will sprout up. If you're going to make an area bare, you then need to plant something you want into it. Well, same if we have this nutrient solution, which is currently just, the water itself is the habitat and it's filled with nutrients, that can quickly go bad. However, if we prime it with something either neutral, something that doesn't affect our plants, or something that even helps our plants, then we've now filled that habitat and we've begun consuming those nutrients with something that we want. And it's a lot harder for pathogens to break in and overtake the system. Now, there are a variety of commercial products available, and those numbers grow every day. The research is still growing, still continuing. The practice is still emerging. There's high variability in efficacy depending on your environmental conditions and the conversion of this efficacy. Like the efficacy is very variable. So the efficacy varies a lot depending on your environmental conditions, and the ability for commercial products, for companies to try to bring this to the market is difficult because of those, again, that environmental variability. As something a engineering friend of mine told me, is that the chemistry in a test tube is different than the chemistry in a bucket is different than a vat. So even if you've got everything working and you think, okay, this is exactly what it needs to be, when you're dealing with 10 milliliters, even though you're using the same equation, you scale that up to 20 liters and suddenly things are different. The environment is different. Even if your concentrations are the same, just the environment, the way all these interactions are happening are different. And so being able to have effective biocontrol on the scale of hydroponic production is still something being sought. So to summarize, our treatment methods from filtration, heat, chemical, biological, and radiation, what's the balance between their effectiveness and their disruptive capacity? How much they're going to potentially throw your system off balance. Filtration has a variable effectiveness, really depending on what kind of filtration it is, and the disruption is low. Regardless whether you get a high or low effective filtration, the disruption to your environment is quite low. There's just the water flows through it and there's minimal other change, just pulling of things out. That's all that's happening, right? We're just pulling things out. We're maybe pulling less out, we're maybe pulling more out, but ultimately we're just screening things out. And so that's why this disruption is low. We're not affecting the system as directly. Heat, high effectiveness. That's how we clean a lot of things, right? Just to make it hot enough to where everything on it dies. High disruption, everything in it dies. It kills any of the beneficial biology that you have in your water. Heat treatment will kill that as well. It also begins to affect the chemistry itself and, disrupting the chelators and that kind of thing. Chemical, also high and high. High effectiveness, we've got some really harsh stuff that we can throw at it and destroy the pathogens. High disruption, because again, we're just dumping something into this system, and so that's going to change it a lot, right? All right, biological, variable effectiveness really depends on your circumstances, what you need to control, and what you have available to you. The disruption is low, either because it won't be very effective because it's trying to be used as treatment rather than prevention, or if it is as a prevention, then it keeps the system quite steady. There's no disruption later because the foundation, the baseline has already been established and it's under control and kept fairly tight. And lastly, radiation. High effectiveness, it's basically, like the heat or chemical control. Like we're just pushing these microbes well past their biological limit. They just simply can't survive it. And so you blast anything with enough radiation, it's going to fall apart. Disruption. Blasting things with radiation is highly disruptive. And then just as we saw with the heat, and even also, of course, with the chemicals, we start affecting the chemical balance of the nutrient solution with radiation, in particular with chelators. And so it can really start to mess with things there. But very effective control. So it's kind of this balance, this effectiveness of the sanitation versus the disruption to your solution. Balancing between these is how you make your choice of sanitation options that you want to pursue for your nutrient solution. So thanks for taking this tour with me, and I wish you the best on choosing your method.